There's a lot of developments and things that are going on across the country and here in Illinois. So we've got a good little panel here. Everyone's going to be very interesting. I do want to thank a few people just at the outset. I want to thank Maureen, Amy, Shmika, Patty Wagner, everyone at Dykema, Len. Here at Dykema, we have a lot of support. It's a great office. They back us to the hilt in what we want to do and allow Scott and I to do a lot of great things in Springfield and work with these folks here. We really appreciate it. But this event would not have come together without them. We pulled it together in about 11 days almost, and we really appreciate it. I want to start by thanking the Youkilis for coming. They came all the way from Cincinnati, and nothing happens without family. And I want to thank my father, who's here. My father, Tom Donovan, was chief of staff to 2 mayors, Richard J. Daley, Michael Belandic, and president of the Chicago Board of Trade. And my mother, who couldn't be here because she's watching our niece, they always are supportive, and they were very helpful in us pulling this thing together, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to let everyone up here introduce themselves so they could do a good job introduce themselves and I don't miss anything. And I think we'll start over here with Jordan, but once again, I want to thank everyone, and thanks to Blake Nielsen. Blake introduced Jordan, Pete, all of us together, and a lot of this came from that introduction, and I really appreciate that too. So thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. I got this, yeah. Thanks, everybody. I'm Jordan Youkilis, one of the founding partners at Key Investment Partners. Really excited to be hosting this event with all of you tonight. Thank you to John and the Dykema team for making this event so amazing. Thank you to my parents for coming up from Cincinnati. And to echo John's point about family, I think it's so important. And what's really exciting about this event tonight too is, we don't always get operators and regulators together to talk about what's going on in cannabis. And so it's really exciting to have all these fantastic gentlemen with us tonight. So thank you. Representative Ford.
Thank you. LaShawn Ford, state representative for the last 18 years, and I'm excited to be in a room to talk about cannabis with no cannabis. How do you do that? Normally when people get together and talk cannabis, they have it.
I am Matt Brewer, and I have a place where we can go buy some cannabis. Originally from Chicago, grew up here, and in 2014, I'm a lawyer by trade, even to this day a partner at a law firm here. But in 2014, a group approached me, and they said, Illinois is legalizing medical. We're applying for some applications. We'd like you to join the team. And I was the 5th or 6th guy who joined this team, and we got 3 licenses of the 21 to grow, and that turned into a very large MSO. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. When 2019 came around, we now had an industry, a well-developed industry, and the state realized it wasn't very diverse. And I just happened to be one of the diverse people who was involved early and was able to benefit greatly from it. But on the other hand, my brother had sold weed and been arrested for it and been on the other side of the law with respect to it. And so when the state rolled out its social equity agenda, my brother was very excited to get involved. So as you say, family is important. Me, my mother, and brother applied for licenses, and we own our dispensaries right now. And so I kind of stumbled into the industry kind of unexpectedly, but now it's been a part of my life for the last 10 years.
Thanks. I'm State Senator Bill Cunningham. I represent a district that contains parts of the southwest side of Chicago and the southwest suburbs. I've been in the General Assembly about 15 years now. Like LaShawn, we're the old guys now. It doesn't take long for that to happen. And I'm relatively new legislatively to working in the cannabis space. Was sort of a topic I managed to avoid through most of my legislative career, but got involved in it this year, a bill involving infused beverages. And it's been a really interesting experience. I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit further detail, but thanks for inviting me here.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry to disappoint you like I did my fellow panelists. I am not, in fact, the mayor of Chicago. I'm Brandon Johnson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called TRP. We are a multi-state cannabis operator with operations in 2 handfuls of states, including Illinois and Chicago, and here to kind of bring that perspective both from working inside of the state of Illinois and also working outside in different jurisdictions and how they compare.
And I am John Donovan. My partner Scott Sellinger's in the backs. I am an attorney with Dykema, and I actually have the pleasure of working with Representative Ford and Senator Cunningham. Became a lawyer in 2012, was hired down at the legislature as an attorney for the Speaker in the House, and ironically, my very first 2 pieces of legislation were the medical marijuana bill and then the craft brewers bill, which was a rewrite to allow craft breweries to operate in Illinois. So fast forward, it kind of came full circle here. So and that's me. Amazing.
So to kick it off, I'd love to just get everyone's thoughts on how they've seen the industry transform since they've been in the space. You know, for Key, my partner Pete and I and our third partner, we broke off from a traditional private equity firm in 2018, 2019, seeing the tremendous growth of the industry and the lack of capital for it. At that time, we thought maybe we were getting in too late. A lot of the juice had been squeezed out, and that clearly has not been the case. You know, we've seen, like in a lot of emerging markets, there have been pretty volatile upswings and downswings, especially as it relates to access to capital. That said, it does feel like we're coming out of one of those downswings and things are looking up for the industry again, but that's just kind of my high-level history of what it's been like in the industry. Maybe Matt would love to start with you on how you've seen it transform.
Sure. Thank you. I remember in 2014 when we were applying for licenses, you would never have a panel like this. Even just sitting in a restaurant, you'd whisper a little bit because there was still such a stigma around the plant. And it's even after legalization, even after businesses got up and running, that stigma lasted for a while. And that alone was a big burden to the industry. I think the stigma's largely gone now, and the industry has become more professional. Chicago, Illinois, but specifically Chicago, is, I tell people, the Silicon Valley of cannabis. You know, Illinois, I think, rightfully made the state a limited license state, which allowed the people with licenses to build real businesses and get vertically integrated. And so Cresco, GTI, PharmaCann, Verano, 3 of the, at different times, have been some of the largest vertically integrated MSOs in the country, all started in Chicago in 2015 because they benefited from getting those, getting vertically integrated in a limited license market. And that turned the industry into a real, Illinois into a real market and a real industry where you could attract real capital and people made real money. And now all of a sudden, the stigma is not there in the same way. The market's gotten a lot tighter. I could talk about this topic for a long time, so I'm going to stop. But the landscape is, the core product, I think, with surrounding states with lower prices, a lot of price pressure, people are trying to find ways to get creative. It plays with land, plays with data, plays with branding, licensing, but the plan itself is not the moneymaker that it used to be. I think if California is any indicator of what's to come, we may be heading in that direction, long term.
Yep, makes sense. So, Braden, how about you?
Sure. Speaking of California, so California is where I'm from and where we started. We really got into the industry in pre-legalization days. California, a lot of people think was the first to legalize recreational cannabis. It wasn't, but it was very early on in medical cannabis in the late 90s. California is not a limited license state, although it was limited by local jurisdictional things, similar to the way you would get permits to build an apartment building, as an example. You can't just go and do it. You had to get approvals from the local jurisdictions. Versus Illinois set a cap and did it actually at a state level versus local jurisdictions, which is a pretty big difference from a regulatory standpoint. California is more of the Wild West in terms of you might have one city next to another city. I'll use this as an example. San Francisco has 150 dispensaries for 800,000 people. There's other cities, San Diego has 16 dispensaries for 3.2 million people. So you can't actually go between them and you can't transfer those licenses, but they do operate in the same supply chain. when it comes to Illinois, you had an initial, I'm going to use the word gold rush that happened in 2015, and then it's steadily grown. It really capped out at 55 licenses, then they granted an extra 55 to get to 110, and now the state cap is 500. To put that in context, there's 1,500 in California already, and there's probably about 250 operating in Illinois. So it's a different business dynamic, and you've also got a more regulated industry in Illinois that is materially different from other states. We do a lot of business in Florida, which is a regulated medical market. One thing that I always explain to people that some people maybe don't know is the supply chain is by your state. You cannot cross a state line with cannabis. So for those that don't know, might as well be different countries when it comes to the actual infrastructure required and the policies and the regulations. It is completely different. The moment you could go to East St. Louis and St. Louis, it's totally different. So I think that's a unique animal. As federal policy may change, I think that'll make it easier for both consumers to get more attractive pricing and also for operators to have consistent regulatory environments.
Great, thanks. Representative Ford, how about within the legislature? What have you seen in terms of your colleagues' acceptance of cannabis, and how has the debate changed since adult use started in 2020?
You know, I think it's becoming more bipartisan, and at first it wasn't. So that's good that people recognize that there's a benefit to having an industry that's regulated and allow for people to actually go and purchase safe, clean cannabis. And I think that's becoming more and more accepted. Like you said, the stigma of the cannabis industry is going away. And so I think that would be the best description that I have.
Yeah, makes sense. And Senator Cunningham, do you have anything to add on that front?
Yeah, I think that's well said. It is, I think, sometimes still remarkable to, and this you sort of alluded to this too, to look back on how much things have changed, over the time I've been in the General Assembly. I mean, that was right when I joined, 2011, is when you first had talk about medicinal use of marijuana. And so, you could kind of see what was coming then. But I think if you would have leapfrogged, back another 10 or 12 years in time and told me that, oh, you're going to be a member of the General Assembly and you're going to vote to fully legalize cannabis, I would have thought, no, that's not going to happen. But that ground shifted, obviously, quickly to bring us to the point we are today. But I think because of that, it's still something we struggle with to regulate. And, you said it well about how there's all these different frameworks from state to state. And I think that regulatory part of this is still very much an experiment. The problem is, I think once you get something set in place, it's really hard to recalibrate.
Yeah. That's
right.
And that's, I think, one of the things we've struggled with in Illinois, and it's an ongoing struggle.
I would say that it's also, Cunningham would know that the industry has brought out more entrepreneurs that want to grow the industry even more. We went from just give us the medical to now we need social consumption, we need this. So it's really amazing how it's becoming an industry that has created more interest across the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Matt, you brought up a great point about Chicago being really one of the epicenters of cannabis. And, being a Colorado guy, Brandon from California, I think that's typically where people associate as the epicenter. But I got to say, Chicago is definitely up there as well. And I think, like you said, because a lot of those MSOs started here and you had a more limited regime, that they were able to really get to scale and start generating some real cash flow. Obviously, a big thing that's been impacting the ability of Illinois operators to make that great cash flow has been the intoxicating hemp market. And for folks who aren't quite as familiar, at the end of 2018, the Farm Bill passed, which legalized hemp that is cannabis less than 0.3% THC. But what folks have quickly realized is that you can extract that THC and make products that are just as intoxicating as traditional THC products. So that's all to say it's been a major point of discussion in the industry in Illinois and more broadly. And I'd love to just get some feedback from the operators as to how that's been impacting your business, and from the regulators as to how you think we can get to a sustainable situation for both hemp and cannabis.
I can start. It's as a cannabis operator, it's frustrating because you have shops selling these products, and I'll paint a picture. In order for us to open a dispensary, we have to comply with lots of different zoning requirements that are put on dispensaries. Because cannabis is still federally illegal, have to find a landlord that doesn't have a mortgage that's federally backed. And so trying to find a prime location with a landlord who has a mortgage that's not federally backed, there are a lot of hoops we have to jump through. And it's a very tough process. It's part of why it takes people so long to get open, and everyone doesn't open. It's a very hard process. And someone can open a shop right next door to you and present to the world as if they're selling the same product without all that overhead, without the same tax structure, no restrictions on real estate, less hoops to jump through from a zoning perspective. And when you go in there, they're going to tell you, I mystery shop sometimes. And I ask, why is this so much cheaper than the place down the street? And they say, I don't know. No one ever says this is actually different. And so there's a lot of risk for customer confusion. And a lot of these places call themselves dispensaries. I couldn't just slap a sign on top of my car and say it's a taxi. Like, there's a medallion and a licensing element to that. And I'd like that to be the case for these shops as well.
I feel like you're giving it to me. The other operator next. I mentioned earlier that every state is a little bit different. Some states have enacted, so the federal farm bill, which Jordan mentioned, basically legalized and authorized the definition of hemp, which is cannabis is a plant. Marijuana is cannabis that has over 0.3 THC, and hemp is marijuana or cannabis that has less than 0.3 THC. There really isn't much of a difference other than that. They're legal definitions. The actual plant is cannabis. Some states have taken policies that aligned those and said, okay, I can take 0.3% from a lot of plants and turn that into psychoactive cannabis, and they've allowed it. Some have regulated that, some have banned it. You've got 50 states in this country plus a couple of districts, and it is materially different. I can tell you that in some states there is an outright ban, and there is no ability to buy or sell or transact in hemp-based psychoactive cannabis products or THCA products, which is a whole separate animal I didn't talk about. And then there's other ones that it's completely allowed. In the state of Florida, there's about 700 dispensaries that are legal. It's a vertically integrated, mandatory vertically integrated, so you can only grow and sell to your own shops. I think they stopped counting at 10,000 smoke shops that sell the same product just in Miami-Dade County.
Wow.
There's just no number to it. I would say, depending on the state, the regulated cannabis market could be 90% of the market, and in other states it could be 5% of the market. So It's very hard to actually try to know the lay of the land in each jurisdiction, because there's federal rules and then states can enact their own rules that layer on top of that, and they change them frequently. I will say, just as I'm going to take my cannabis hat off and put my dad hat on. I have 3 kids. And I am not okay with the fact that my 7-year-old son can walk into a gas station and buy weed. I'm not. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The question is, do people actually understand that that's happening right now? You can do that. And how do you create a regulatory framework that can actually make it so that if it's psychoactive, THC, Delta-9, that's regulated in a way to make sure that it isn't going to the wrong people. And then if it's hemp-derived product for industrial purposes, or CBD or CBN, which is some of the cannabinoids, then how do we create a separate framework, because those are not psychoactive? So it'll be interesting to see how that develops state by state and even nationally. There's a lot of bills that have been proposed federally, local states, and some happen, some don't, and it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah.
Real quick, I was telling Jordan before we started this, I was getting gas in my car just down the street here in gas station. Right on the sliding glass doors, it advertised THC beverages. that was never the intent when we drafted regulations in Illinois. That's just a byproduct of what's happened because there's a gap federally now. I guess the question I probably have for everybody here is, would you rather see a solution come through state regulation with what you have, or would you rather see it resolved federally and just take the issue off the table everywhere? Okay, back to you, Brandon.
Leave it to them. I don't want to talk too much.
Is that more of a industry question, or, I mean, I'm always for the feds taking care of it, so we don't less work.
You got enough to do.
But I don't know, maybe that's more of someone in the industry question, if you'd rather have federal or.
Why don't you go and I'll go next?
I don't have a strong view on this. I do feel like federal would probably level the playing field a little bit more, just because it's federal. And state, to the point that's been mentioned a number of times, state to state just creates a patchwork that's hard to get consistency from. And sometimes it's, there's education gaps. And I remember 2014, a lot of you all know this. I mean, legislators were voting on passing this bill, the medical, and most people didn't know much about the industry, the plant, and it was the applicants in many cases who were educating them. And so it's, if you do that state to state and adjust for those different gaps in different states, it's almost necessarily going to be a collage that just complicates things even more.
Yeah.
I'll add to that, this is analogous to another issue we dealt with this year in the General Assembly, and that we dealt with because of inaction on the federal level, and that is regulation of cryptocurrency. Very complicated issue. I still struggle to understand myself. But, we started to hear stories, not unlike you hear about in the cannabis market or Delta 9 and what have you, where people are coming to us, whether they're, in the crypto case would be an individual who is taking advantage of some sort of fraud. And, you hear this story of woe, you see a story in the newspaper, you want to do something about it, you want to regulate it, even though it's a currency, it should be federally regulated. We hear from people who come to us with a story about a kid buying some sort of intoxicating substance at a gas station. We read a story about it, we want to do something about it. So state government jumps in oftentimes when the federal government fails to act, and the federal government often fails to act. The Congress just doesn't really pass a lot of legislation anymore. I'm sometimes amazed, and we might have a future congressman on this panel, but I'm amazed by some of the people who will serve, 6, 7, 8 years in Washington and never pass a bill, never sponsor a bill that is passed, which is kind of amazing when you work in a state legislature and we're, even though the least active member of the Illinois General Assembly is passing a couple of bills a year. So a lot of times we're forced in to regulate because of the lack of a federal regulation, lack of a federal consensus. I don't know that it's always the best way to do it. It sounds like it's certainly not in the cannabis industry, but that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah.
Just real quick, to that point, I think I saw a number that just last year, I think 30 states introduced THC beverage legislation. I imagine that number is almost identical for hemp legislation to try and corral, this riff you have going on right now. And I don't anticipate that number getting smaller next year if the federal government doesn't act, which is why I'm curious as to what people want, which is better because you see a lot of action in state legislatures across the country. But to your point, if they do step in and solve it, you're going to end up with another layer of patchwork laws. Right. And still potentially having an issue that has to be resolved for those business owners and that regulated market.
Yeah. So Rep. Ford, this is something we've talked about in the past as well with regards to making sure that there's not a new prohibition imposed on hemp. and that hemp operators still have a framework to operate in. So do you have thoughts on what your ideal state level framework would look like, assuming we don't get some decision at the federal level to clear it all up?
Yeah, I understand, Matt. Matt is like, what you want to do? Brandon, I mean, it's one of those things that it's unfortunate, but, I can't be a part of a prohibition of something. That we've gone from that with cannabis Delta 9, and now we're saying we need to have a prohibition with Delta 8. The problem that I have with that is the state should have checked it long ago, and you have people that have actually invested lots of money in this industry, and to shut them down would be a problem. How do you shut down a business? I think you got to regulate them. The problem is if we don't get federal guidance, then it becomes a big problem, because the federal government, if they help us, then it'll be a level playing field, because cannabis has different rules to play by. Delta 9 has different rules than Delta 8. Then you got the banking part where people could actually borrow money for a Delta 8 shop. They could get a mortgage on their house to fund their Delta 8 shops. They could use credit cards for their Delta 8 shops. So the regulations, I mean, they don't have to have security. It's just so bad. And I think that the fact that Illinois has allowed for cannabis owners to invest and have this type of regulations on them, we need to do something. And I would think the best way to do it is to reduce the regulations on these guys and women that have cannabis shops, because you're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. But what you can do is realize that we started something and we were concerned about it. We know more now. Now we don't have to worry about them having security the way they have, because that's a big deal. We don't have to worry about them having some of the things that the federal government is not concerned about. That's the best way to at least try to level the playing field for the people that have invested millions of dollars and have competition that's unchecked almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great segue to talk a little bit about potential federal level reform. One of the big issues that has severely impacted cannabis businesses historically is a provision of the tax code called Section 280E. And because cannabis is currently Schedule 1, what that effectively does is it means that cannabis businesses are taxed at the gross profit level instead of operating income, and has been a major, major drain on cannabis businesses' cash flow, which hemp operators have not had to pay. Now, what we've been seeing of late is in the summer of 2023, the Biden administration supported the rescheduling process, which moved forward throughout the rest of his term. Before the election, candidate Trump had also tweeted his support of the rescheduling process. And then in the last week and a half, we've seen a very favorable market movement as President Trump again reiterated that rescheduling is likely to happen and pretty imminently. And so that would help, I think, level out the tax situation. I'm curious, Matt and Brandon, to get both of your guys' perspective on, do you think that's enough to level the playing field with hemp, or is there more that needs to be done even if we do get rescheduling?
I don't think it would level the playing field. It would certainly go a long way. I mean, I think clarity and consistency is really what we're looking for. That's probably 50% of the problem, is just not knowing. And if you're unregulated, you have clarity and consistency. You kind of know what you can do, which is all the normal things you can do. Your customer can use an American Express. You can take bank deposits, all those other things. At a federal level, I think that, 280E is the other one that you mentioned. It's a very, very large headwind for regulated cannabis operators. Again, hemp doesn't have that, because hemp, if you're below 0.3 THC, is considered federally legal. If you're Schedule 1, you're not. So that means that, just to put it in context, if you collect $100, you pay taxes on $100 as if it's pure income. Now, there's a lot of big businesses. Imagine if businesses were taxed at an effective rate of, in some cases, 40 or 50% on gross receipts. Yeah. It it makes it so that pricing has to be much higher in order to accommodate it. It's not helpful to a consumer. It's actually quite inflationary for medicinal patients who need these products in a lot of cases. But if the government's taxing you at that rate, it just elevates the pricing. And that doesn't necessarily exist in the hemp market. Now, the hemp market has created broader availability, which I think, as someone who's seen the cannabis market change for the last 10 years, I'm certainly supportive of anything that's going to create broader access. And I think most people on here would agree with that. It is a good thing what we are doing in terms of creating better access. And I think that hemp and Delta 8 and Delta 9 and THCA have played a role in that. What I would say is clarity and consistency at a federal level in terms of the financial system, the tax rates, the regulatory framework, the supply chain. If we could get to that, then that probably will help grow the overall accessibility for patients and recreational users alike.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I don't have much to add. I don't think it would level the playing field, but it would certainly be a big improvement.
Yeah.
Just even valuations, the investment climate, all would be a lot more favorable. Having access to cheaper capital will go a long way for a lot of the operators.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on the cheaper capital front, I think if we could get something like safer banking passed through Congress, that would go a long way as well. So Rep. Ford is potentially our next member.
You have my commitment. I will fight for it.
I love it. I love it. There you go. And then we were touching on hemp beverages earlier. Senator Cunningham, I'd love to get your perspective, given you recently sponsored a bill in this space.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is not an area I've spent a lot of time in the legislative process. One area I have, though, is in liquor regulation. It's kind of mundane, but also pretty detailed and can be kind of important in Springfield. And every state does a lot of different things with liquor regulation too. I mean, there are some states where the state sells the liquor. They run the liquor store. So it's a patchwork as far as liquor regulation is concerned too. But there is a parallel, and it's something that I had been involved in liquor regulation to what's gone on in the cannabis space. Is you've had market interruption or market disturbance by new entries into the market. We've seen this, you're all familiar with beer. The beer distribution in the state of Illinois, highly regulated ever since the end of Prohibition. And what started happening about 20 years ago, the microbreweries opening up all over the state. And but they were limited in how much they can sell. So the established industry, the Budweisers, the Millers of the world, the people who distribute beer, which is another separate part of beer regulation, didn't like the idea of these new market interruptions. And it was also something that the retailers weren't sure what to deal with. So over a number of years, and John mentioned he worked on one of the first bills that did this. After a lot of tough negotiations, we found a way to lift some of the restrictions on distribution, and it has allowed for a new industry in the state of Illinois, craft brewing, to take off. Similar things have been done in the distillery space too. We see that it's somewhat behind where beer is, but it is still something that we've worked on, and we've tried to expand it. It's good to have these market interruptions. It's a good thing for market economy, and we want to make sure that it can happen, but we also want to make sure that, particularly if you're dealing with a potentially dangerous substance, it is regulated. So that's now where this whole idea of infused beverages, intoxicating beverages, has come in. And what we've tried to do, and what the bill I proposed attempt to do, is to essentially treat intoxicating beverages the same, whether they're liquor, cannabis, THC, whatever, Delta 8, Delta 9, doesn't matter. put out a beverage that in some way is intoxicating, you follow the existing regulatory regime we have in place for alcohol. We thought it was, because this has been so difficult to navigate through, that this would be the easiest way to do it. It is not easy, and the bill did not move forward this spring, which we kind of anticipated, but it's something we will continue to work on. We don't want people going into gas stations and buying an infused beverage when they're less than 21 years old. It is going to get them intoxicated. That's something we want to avoid. Treating it like it's an alcohol beverage is one way to do that. But we've already set up a cannabis regulatory framework in the state, and there are people who are invested in that and do not want to see that kind of disturbance. Right down to seeing fights among regulators. The cannabis regulators in the state don't want the liquor regulators coming into their lane and vice versa. So those are, problems that we have to deal with, and why I think it's a long process. But it was a long process doing this, regulating the beer market, the craft beer market, and we eventually have gotten to a place where the Budweisers in your neighborhood craft beer can largely coexist. They still bump heads on things, but they're both legal in the marketplace, and the new industry is thriving. There's some problems, economic problems that they're dealing with right now, but that's kind of a success story. We've tried to see if we could impose the same sort of thing on the infused beverage industry when it comes to cannabis-related products.
Very helpful.
So I saw a stat recently. I may have the low end number just off by 1% or so, but if it gives you any confidence, Leader Cunningham, there was this poll I saw that came out, and obviously it's from the Beer Institute and Wine and Spirit Association, but 67% of the public, according to their poll, would like to see them sold at dispensaries. 86% of the public is okay with the 3-tier system. And I think part of why you see that figure is the public has had a long time to be comfortable with alcohol and liquor regulations. And so they trust those regulations. They trust the 3-tier system to keep that safe, keep it out of minors' hands. And so there is an overwhelming sense of, hey, putting it in taking it out of those regulations and putting it into a 3-tier system style thing, that the public has a comfort level with that. And that's just where it is. And I think that also, again, it goes to a familiarity that folks have with alcohol and liquor that isn't necessarily totally there with hemp and cannabis.
Yeah. And John, I'd also love to get your perspective too. Illinois has obviously been historically a leader in alcohol manufacturing and distribution. Are you seeing that a lot of those companies are looking to maintain that leadership position in hemp beverages?
I actually don't know the answer to that one, Jordan. I think it's a little bit sort of kind of, Brandon said, it's hard for folks to want to move and establish businesses across state line, because once they're in one place, they're established in that regulatory framework. The answer I'd like to give you is I would love to see everyone move to Illinois. I have pro-Chicago, pro-Illinois. I love people here. I'd like to see businesses here. So I would love to see more of that. I'd like to come up with a system where it attracts people here, because I think Illinois is a great state for it.
Yeah.
One thing, Jordan, I would add to that, we've seen, so liquor consumption is going down. So people in the liquor space now are looking at infused beverages as a way to replace their loss of market share.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the players who've traditionally been in that the liquor, alcohol, beer space looking to expand it, or they're wondering what happened to their lost market share. Some of it has gone to cannabis-related materials. So. But again, so now you have people who have traditionally been in that market seeing these, people who have traditionally been in the liquor market coming over into their area, and it creates a tension and a political problem for us to solve, which is, why it can be a lengthy process in the legislature trying to get the right framework in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things that's pretty unique about the beverages space, right, when THC started selling edibles, those took off very quickly, and you typically see in a state when they legalize, it's about 60% flower sales and about 40% predominantly concentrates and vapes and edibles. And then those ratios tend to flip over time as more people flip to edibles. Now, beverages, everyone thought early on in the THC space would be a huge growth category, but that really didn't pan out. And I think that's for a number of reasons, namely around the cannabis distribution networks just aren't suited to carry big, heavy, bulky beverages, and the dispensaries themselves have a lot more limited shelf space and less refrigerated space than a lot of liquor stores. So it seems to me that the THC operators have generally felt more okay to have hemp beverages than the rest of the hemp market. Matt, would you agree with that? And do you think they're complementary, or do you still feel it's a little bit undercutting the THC market?
So I agree with your assessment in terms of the adaptation of beverages. I think a lot of the larger companies have just smartly taken on the beverages to diversify, and you have some segment of your products that you can distribute a lot more widely. You have companies like Cookies who have just gone in heavy on hemp, and from a business perspective, it's a smart move. It still risks the consumer confusion, I think.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. There's not a lot of, my own personal opinion is that beverages are still new enough that there's not a lot of consistency across beverages, and a lot of customers don't know what they're getting from beverage to beverage. But I think it's partly for the reasons you mentioned. They haven't really come into the market at scale in the way that you might have otherwise expected, the way edibles have taken off.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Actually, so Jordan, you asked a question about, I think it was the ability within cannabis to get these things out and not being heard. I'm going to give a shameless plug to somebody in the audience right now, Keith Weathersall with the Illinois Licensed Beverage Association. I have an idea for some folks who are totally equipped at handling intoxicating beverages and getting those out to folks who would love to have a whole new revenue stream that they can utilize. The gaming has been helping them stay alive, and they're seeing, as Leader Cunningham pointed out, young people aren't drinking the way they are. This might be an avenue for them, and they have been fully adept in the three-tier liquor system and how they operate. One thing I wrote that I know some folks don't like is the Bassett test, but we have Bassett training here, and Bassett training teaches those bartenders how to recognize intoxication and what they're doing. Maybe it's looking at expanding Bassett to intoxicating beverages and opening that to them.
Yeah.
So just a shameless plug for you, Keith.
Awesome. Did you have anything to add, Brandon, on the beverages topic?
No, we can move on.
Sure.
I think it's all been covered.
Yeah, no problem. So Rep. Ford, would love to get your thoughts on Illinois' social equity program. I think it's definitely been hailed as a success, although there's certainly been challenges too. So would love to just get your thoughts on where you think there have been successes and where we could continue to improve.
Yeah, I think Illinois did with the MSOs having the jump start and the industry being a little new, no one really knew what was happening. But the fact that MSOs were able to get started, that automatically put everyone behind. And many people would say, it's black people, it's women, but it's even just everybody but those that got the jump start. There are white men and white women that just didn't get a chance to get started in the industry. But we know that this industry is led by white men. There's no doubt, but there are some other people that wish that they could have gotten in, and the actual framework just doesn't allow it. Federally, it doesn't allow it because you got to have cash money,
right?
And I just know that this was like a dream for a lot of people to win the lottery, and everyone really believed that this was going to be the ticket to make them multimillionaires. And they soon learned that it's all cash and it's not easy. And I don't think people even paid attention to the requirements because when they start digging in and peeling back the onion, they I'm in a little trouble. And so social equity has been, I would say there's been some good, but the industry, because of the feds and because of the MSOs being out front has made it very difficult.
Yeah. Thanks. Matt, would you add anything?
Yeah, I would say I agree, and it's tough. The head start is everything. You know, the timing. By the time social equity rolled out, we're in 2020 is when it was supposed to roll out. And then obviously COVID delayed things, but then there were a bunch of lawsuits and other challenges to the whole system, to the whole effort. And so licenses didn't get awarded until 2 years later. And so those same companies that had a head start in the medical market now have a 2-year head start in the rec market. And that time is golden in a new emerging industry. And so by the time social equity applicants were trying to get up and running, they were way behind, hard to get the capital. Standing up a business requires lots of expertise, and in this highly regulated environment, security plans and inventory and purchasing plans, the real estate play, the zoning, all the different areas of expertise that you have to navigate, and the requirements to qualify for social equity. It's hard to find a group of people that meet all the qualifications to qualify for social equity and have the capital and the expertise to navigate. And so you saw a lot of what some would call, creative solutions or gaming the system, where social equity groups were really backed by people who weren't social equity and had deep pockets and diluted them and bought them out as soon as they could. So there's a lot of that going on. But it's a noble effort and I think an important one, a step in the right direction. And frankly, you did have a lot of people who were able to make some money out of it. They, in many cases, weren't able to stand up and continue to operate businesses, but some people sold licenses, and some people have stayed on and been able to operate and get experience and expertise in this new industry. People have careers. So it's just not all bad, but certainly still room to continue to improve.
Yep. And we've also seen challenges to social equity programs in other states as well. I mean, do you think that there's a risk that it could go away altogether, or?
Well, I'll start quickly on this one and pass it because I think I'm talking too much. But I'm also a lawyer, and so.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And we do not by the hour. But in this political environment, I think anything is fair game. DEI is under scrutiny across the board, and education and all sorts of other facets.
Yeah.
The courts right now have a very clear view, and I think it'd be tough if, for example, someone really challenged a social equity program or DEI program. A lot of uncertainty about how that would turn out in these courts today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think every state makes their own policies, and there's different versions of classification. I think, some of the things to note is a lot of states have done more like protectionism from a residency requirement, or even cities. And those have actually been challenged in court, and we have a fragmented system. I'm actually one of the few non-lawyers up here, so I'm just but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. In New York just last week, they overruled that you can't have a residency requirement to restrict cannabis licensure. Missouri had a residency requirement. In California, cities would say, they wouldn't necessarily say you have to be from this city, but what they say is, you get 50 bonus points for being from this city. Well, when the test is out of 500 points and the loser is 548 points versus 550, they're basically saying it. Many of those have been challenged. We'll see where that ends up. I think as that ties into social equity, not necessarily correlated, but there are these cases out there that are going to try and change the way that licenses are issued. Going to Illinois, I was not here in 2014-15. We actually had social equity partnerships and stood 2 stores up in Illinois as part of those rounds. But we also were part of the process of seeing people game the system and end up with 20, 30 licenses with all of their cousins, and they found people that, in a lot of ways it was tokenism of, all right, here's your name's on this, but there was really no operational chops and nothing behind it. I think that social equity is very well intended. It is very noble, which is the word you used. I think that it has been executed poorly in a lot of ways that didn't really achieve the outcomes that people want, that as a cannabis industry, I think we all believe in. I do think it's fair to go back and say, the war on drugs disproportionately affected people below a certain poverty line, people of certain race, creed, whatever it may be. And I think we have a moral and ethical obligation to try and fix that and create opportunities within the industry to do so. I mean, I would argue, I'll get on my my stand here. I think that if they'd created some sort of fund where every license fee went in, instead of saying, all right, we're going to marry you two unlikely fellows and you have the money and you meet the qualifications and you're an operator. Well, what if they'd made it so that there was non-social equity licenses that actually supported a fund where people could then go get the financing and actually stand up their own shops and meaningfully contribute back to the community? Mm-hmm. It's easy to say that in the benefit of hindsight. States have done it. It hasn't been perfect. It's achieved some outcomes that we all support. It's created ancillary effects that weren't great in a lot of scenarios. I think we're all learning. It's an upstart industry, but it'll be interesting how that plays out as new states come online and new social equity programs exist. New York has had a lot of issues with theirs. Illinois had, I think, 2 or 3 years worth of lawsuits that dragged it out. Imagine you're somebody where the legal requirement is that you have to be below a certain income threshold, and now you're carrying rent for 3 years while someone's suing because they didn't get the result they want. Put a lot of people into financial insolvency. So, that's a scenario where well-intended policies actually harm some people more than it helped them.
It's really helpful.
And one thing I should note is that LaShawn here has been a champion of social equity. I don't want that to get lost in this conversation. Yeah. I know it's not easy, and just for all the reasons we've been talking about, it's a very complicated framework. So much appreciated for the work that you've done.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
Do you want to do Q&A?
Yeah, let's definitely do Q&A. One more question I wanted to ask, and then let's definitely get some audience participation. Senator Cunningham, I think one of the reasons that folks have been surprised that it didn't move faster at the federal level, despite the fact that it's got such broad-based support, I think it's something like 90% of Dems and 70% of Republicans now support adult use cannabis, is because that support is wide but not deep. And so I'd love to just hear, do you get much feedback from your constituents about this topic at all, or is it really more when you're at cannabis-focused events?
Yeah, it's not something I really hear much about from my constituents anymore. I think it's sort of baked in. It was, very controversial 10 years ago. It's not so much now. We will occasionally have a constituent issue with a hemp shop that people are upset about. We'll get that. I got to tell you, the thing I hear about the most from constituents related to cannabis is complaints about people when they're walking down the street or driving their car, smelling fellow motorists smoking weed in their cars. I hear that constantly, complaints about that from constituents. I guess I complain about it as well. But as far as, it's interesting. Another thing I work a lot on legislatively is gaming and, on casino regulation and those sort of things. And one of the remarkable things that's happening now, I think, like cannabis has hit this place, is one of the biggest opponents to any sort of gaming bill in Springfield were the people who were morally opposed to gambling. And like, this is bad, you can't do this, it's bad for society. And they had the ability to kill bills. That is completely gone.
Wow.
That sort of political counterweight in Springfield no longer exists. And I think we've kind of gotten to a pretty similar place now with cannabis. It's really the fights that occur are, to a layperson who doesn't know the difference between cannabis and hemp. And believe me, legislators struggle to understand the difference. Sure. What we're talking about is viewed as sort of an intramural fight. that it's, two different parts of the same industry fighting with each other, and it does not really resonate with the public. I do not hear much at all from ordinary constituents about the regulatory framework for cannabis and hemp. It's just more of those like nuisance issues that come up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I just don't hear about it from constituents.
Has that been the same for you, Rep. Ford?
Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, I would love to take some questions from the audience if we have any.
I have one. You talked about reclassification. I'm just curious what you guys think. Assuming it does get reclassified, what would you see as the first things that happen after that?
Banking.
That would be the big one.
I'll do it. I think you need to use banking, broader financial markets and financial system. I think that people logically think, okay, you can access capital markets or you can bank. There's a lot of operational things that occur and exist that if you sell sandwiches, you don't really realize it, but taking credit card is a huge deal. Not because, okay, there's, people spend more on credit cards, we can talk about that. But when you swipe a credit card, that cash goes immediately to your account that night. If you're in the cannabis business, that's cash that somebody handed over to a person. Now you have to worry about cash shrink. You have to worry about the security associated with cash. You have to worry about where does it go? Where do you deposit it? What is the cycle time of, if you collect $1, how long until you can use that? And you've got vendors that want to get paid, but you can't get the cash out of a store. Just the operational things. How do you make sure that you put a camera over every single POS to make sure people aren't stealing money? Because if people steal money and your cash doesn't reconcile against your product, all of a sudden you now get a $50,000 fine from the state.
Wow.
And you start thinking about all these like operational logistics. It's much more than just, we could go public on the New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
It is the fundamental operations of the business that I've run businesses before that were civilian industries, and you take for granted things that you don't really realize until it's gone. And it doesn't solve everything, but it takes a meaningful bite out of just about every logistical problem that the industry has.
Yeah.
And I could talk to you for 10 hours about this, but the list is extensive. You guys all shop online, right? You can't shop online for cannabis because you can't buy cannabis online because we can't take credit cards. So we can't ship to you because you have to pay it in person. We can't deliver because you can't run the risk of having a delivery person have a bunch of cash on them. So if you really pull on the thread, it is exponential how big of an impact rescheduling would be. There's certainly more further to go, but it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. One other thing I'd mention on that front too, and I don't think it's going to happen with rescheduling, but hopefully not too long thereafter. Brandon mentioned with regards to listing on the NYSE and the NASDAQ. So historically, any company that has U.S. cannabis operations, you can't access major exchanges like the NASDAQ or the NYSE. And that's been a huge issue for investment dollars and for actually finding buyers for cannabis businesses, because you think about any of the big alcohol, tobacco, CPG players, right? They're almost all listed publicly. And so they can't even make a minority investment in a cannabis business, much less acquire them all together. So I think once we have that ability, that's really going to help investors actually see some returns, bring in capital, and, virtuous cycle there.
You see people trying to get exposure to private debt and credit.
Yeah.
Institutional players, do you think rescheduling actually opens it up to institution?
I think it'll be at an institution by institution basis, but definitely, even in the last week and a half, we've seen private lenders getting more aggressive in this space. So yeah, I think it'll have a big impact.
Does that require amendments to fund documents and stuff like that, or is rescheduling enough to jumpstart it, or is there that under the water type changes that would have to still take place in order for institutional to participate?
I think it ultimately just depends on the institution itself, what their risk appetite is, because you do see some big institutional debt managers who have already put money to work. So yeah, I think it's really just what's their overall risk on approach. Yeah. And did you have a question as well?
I don't have a question, but I have a couple of thoughts and comments. First of all, it's a great panel. And, you know, as I'm listening, I realize how little I know about the subject. And I commend, you know, Senator Cunningham, Shawn Ford. The demands on your time are incredible, and the subject matter you deal with in Springfield is so broad that no one could be an expert in anything, and that's why you have a committee system, and it works. You mentioned my background. I worked 10 years in the mayor's office with 2 Chicago mayors. But I was CEO of the Chicago Board of Trade for 18 years. And you mentioned NASDAQ. So we were highly regulated. Rule number 1 in Chicago Board of Trade rule book lists that we're the world's oldest and largest commodity exchange. The CEO is responsible for all government relations. So I spent a lot of time in Washington. I learned one thing about lobbying in Washington. First thing is you have to be able to get in the door. And you have to have an acceptability when you get in the door. And you have to have trust when you get in the door. Because when you come in and speak to the congressmen or the senators or reps, you know that your opponents are coming in right behind you, and you're going to tell them both sides of the issue and why you want them to vote your way. And it's important that they have confidence in you when you walk in the door. And if you can't do those things, you don't stand a chance. The other thing that I learned early on, I had very good lawyers who worked for me in Washington, and I understood the political business very well. But a senator said to me once, with the 2 lawyers that I had there, he said, with all due respect to them, Tom, when the CEO comes to town, we know it's important. So, you know, you've got to remember these things. You have a limited amount of time you can get with people, and it's got to be used wisely. But your lobbyists, it's good if you got attorneys, an attorney-client privilege in many instances. But when you have lobbyists, they've got to know your subject matter cold.
Yeah.
They've got to know the first question, second, third. But the person they're talking to has to believe them and trust them, because they're going to vote based on that. And no one wants to be misled. So again, I give both of you credit here today. I wish you luck in your future career. And I know your time is so important, so it's a great panel you put together today, and I'm happy I was invited.
Well, thank you for coming, Tom. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Rep. Ford. Yeah, thanks, Senator Cunningham. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Brandon.
Hi, I'm Anthony Pruitt, Greener Tomorrows. First of all, Mr. Donovan, thanks for the invite. Great panel, as Mr. Donovan said. Great words of wisdom also. I work on the green side of things, solar panels. That big beautiful bill has greatly. So, been doing some pivoting to my other baby, which is IT services. And something that we see is like operators who are struggling with things like secure data storage, right? That's really big. Seed to sale tracking, which you mentioned earlier, was something that was real big on the way to Lollapalooza, and I think that's going to change a few more times also. But like the cybersecurity for patient information, right? On that medical side, also in compliance, we're seeing a lot of regulation there. We're seeing a lot of change there also. And for the legislative side, what I've noticed a lot in politics is when it's when it's something that's a cash flow, cash cow, sometimes we sweep stuff under the rug, right? And we let smaller entities or those smaller businesses get away with some things. So when it comes to those IT services, those compliance regulations, how are you guys going to work with those in the future to ensure that it's not going to get out of hand?
So are you talking about compliance for who in particular?
So as this industry changes, the compliance regulations change.
Yep.
So what I find in IT services is there's a lot of problems with securing that data.
Okay.
So the storage, as well as like licensings that you have to have for, you know, certain VoIP things that we have, certain POS systems, things of that sort.
Okay. So, I mean, I think we've largely stayed out of that. Now, we're involved in the federal government is when you're talking about medical records and HIPAA restrictions. But to the best of my knowledge, it's something that the state legislature stayed out of. We've got involved with biometric type issues and what have you. That Illinois has a very restrictive biometric law that has created challenges for the business community. But beyond that, and beyond the healthcare stuff, I'm not really, but maybe you can inform me about more specifics.
Well, it's more so for like the integration of the system. So like the government basically said that there was a new system that was needed to track product, right?
Okay.
Because in the state of Illinois, our product
Okay.
has to come from where? East St. Louis, not St. Louis.
Right. Well, this is well, I will say a problem that I am familiar with on this is the cannabis regulatory space. There are multiple state agencies involved in that, which is a real problem. So you might end up having to go to 2 or 3 different places to do exactly what you're talking about. The governor at one point did have a proposal in place to consolidate those things, because you have the Department of Agriculture, there's a bunch of different agencies involved with it. So that might be a way to deal with what you're talking about, by having one-stop shopping from a regulatory standpoint for the industry.
And I think that probably for like that would probably help you guys also, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that spot that I see the sign.
Yeah, you guys are just getting blasted right there. It's like
I often give out this in gelatin. I'm used to it.
It's actually shining off my bald spot.
We can't see it.
Consolidation would be helpful, just more coordination, more efficiency. And, there's the Department of Ag, there's the IDFPR. Those are the 2 major bodies that we deal with. Well, we, as a dispensary, we deal with IDFPR more. But the state police obviously play a big role with security. And so, I think what you were talking about earlier, there was a conversion to metric that cultivators, dispensaries all had to do by July 1st. This is a complete overhaul of how we track product. And it was just a heavy lift for everyone.
Is it a state system?
Yeah.
They just rewarded. It's not their system, it's their policy.
Yes. Correct.
Got it. I see what I mean. Got it.
And so that was a big lift, inevitable. But at least personally, from our perspective, the conversion itself wasn't too bad. There was some, a lot of our suppliers had issues, which became our problems, and so that we had trouble with it from that perspective.
Great, thanks.
One last question.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to, social equity license are going to get exposure to medical?
I hope so.
Like, from tax perspective, that's
Huge.
We hope so. I mean, it's the right thing to do, to open it up so that they're able to sell to, even if you don't look at it from a business standpoint, look at from the patient standpoint. They have so far to travel to get their medicine, so we need to do it.
Thanks. Great. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you for this panel. This was amazing. Thank you.
So I want to thank everyone. I really want to thank guys from Key Investment for partnering with us. And again, I want to thank Dykema for letting us do this.
Yeah.
Most importantly, I want to thank Brandon, Matt, Leader Cunningham, and our future Congressman, Representative Ford over there. I really appreciate, as Mr. Donovan said, their time there's a lot of demands on their time. And for them to take the time out to come and talk with us, same thing with, CEOs, the most important thing to a CEO is their time. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate all of you guys coming out here, and I think it was very informative. So if it wasn't, guys, we don't want to know. We hope you all enjoyed it, though, okay? So thank you.
Great job.